The Razer Kiyo Pro records at up to 1080p, 60 frames per second. I picked mine up for its launch price of $200. It does YUY2 at 1080-60, and it also has an optional HDR effect, which sets the image to 1080-30. Its field of view defaults to 80 degrees, but it can be adjusted to 90 or 103 degrees, but this results in a gnarly fisheye effect. Most of the Kiyo Pro settings can be controlled in OBS, but the field of view adjustment and HDR setting can only be accessed in the Razer Synapse software. The software does crash a lot, and when it does, you're gonna have to unplug the webcam and plug it back in to get it working. So honestly, I stay away from Razer Synapse as much as possible. The wire length is 60 inches and it comes with a privacy cover, but it's not actually attached to the webcam, so it is easy to lose this. The AVerMedia Live Streamer CAM 513, PW513, records it up to 4K 30 frames per second or 1080p 60 frames per second. I picked mine up at its launch price of $250, but I've seen this thing on sale lately for $200. Now the PW513 is really interesting when it comes to video formats. If you use the webcam directly as a source in OBS, at 1080p 60 frames per second, you get the option to do MJPEG or UYVY. And at 4K 30 frames per second, you're stuck at MJPEG. But you can also do 4K 15 frames per second and do UYVY. And to add to all this, if you add Cam Engine as a source, the only option it gives you is YUY2. So if there's like a rep from AVerMedia who wants to clarify why that is, or if I got something wrong there, then feel free to comment. Also, using UYVY at 1080p 60 frames per second, it looks like it's causing the camera to like overexert itself. It's getting choppy. The blue light is like flashing on and off. You see that little like sparkle. So it's not really like a usable format as of now, at least from my testing. But yeah, something important to note. It has a 94-degree field of view, which is overkill for most setups, but since it's 4K, you can zoom in a little bit and still retain a ton of detail. The PW513 settings are accessible in OBS, but if you add AVerMedia's Cam Engine software as a source in OBS, then when you change the settings in that software, the settings persist past a reboot or after you unplug and replug the device, which is really cool. If you do pick this up, make sure to update the software and firmware to its latest version so you get access to the new advanced settings and the improved performance. It has a wire length of 59 inches and it has a privacy cover built onto the device. The Logitech C920 is still the most popular webcam on the market. It records at up to 1080p 30 frames per second. I picked mine up for $50, but the price on this one fluctuates more than any of the other webcams that I've seen. It only records in MJPEG or H.264. It has a wire length of 60 inches. You get the most control over the C920 in OBS. You don't even need to bother with Logitech's Logic Capture. It doesn't provide any extra benefit with this device. For current prices on all three webcams, links are in the description. Here is an audio test of each device. So now we have an audio test with the Razer Kiyo Pro. And the only sounds that really should be heard are just my voice, and then there's a computer fan that's below me. And then there's a few cars that are going outside the window over there. So this is what it sounds like, the Razer Kiyo Pro built-in microphone audio test. Now we have audio coming from the AVerMedia Live Streamer CAM 513, PW513. So this is what it will sound like with the built-in microphone. And again, we have the computer fan that's down here, and then some cars are driving outside the window, but the window is closed. So yeah, another microphone test here with the AVerMedia PW513. Here we have the Logitech C920, and we're doing a microphone test with this webcam to see what it sounds like. And this is the built-in microphone, fan a little bit below me from the computer, and then cars driving outside the window. This is the Logitech C920 microphone test. The best microphone is the Razer Kiyo Pro. It has the fullest sound even when it's just over arm's length away. Its biggest weakness is that there is no noise cancellation. So when my computer fan kicks up during like gameplay, or if there's like a lot of noise, someone running around upstairs or there's noise outside, it's gonna pick that up. The PW513 is in the middle. It sounds tinny and it sounds like the microphone that comes on one of those earbuds that you get at like a gas station. The Logitech C920 has the worst microphone of these three devices. It sounds very muffled, and the fan noise from my computer turns into this like high-pitched whine in this device. Now, I wouldn't buy any webcam for the microphone. I would always supplement it with some other microphone. I've reviewed a few microphones on this channel, the Razer Siren Mini, which I've used since it came out, the Blue Yeti, the Pfeiffer K669B, and right now I'm testing the HyperX Quadcast. So if this sounds good, then let me know. Now let's compare the image quality. In the daytime with daylight only, the exposure and gain settings have to be set pretty high so the image isn't too dark. The result is a lot of motion blur on the Kiyo Pro and PW513 and a lot of grain on the PW513, but they are sufficiently bright. Now I'll be showing a bit more footage with the AVerMedia PW513 just because there's so many different settings that you can alter on that thing as far as resolution and hue. You can see me messing with the hue right here, trying to get it right. I can't. And I'm also showing some 4K and some 1080p. And in 1080p 60 frames per second, this thing loses a lot of sharpness. It's actually sharper at 1080-30. The C920 is the darkest, but it doesn't fall too far behind the premium devices. For a webcam that's competing with devices that came out 10 years after it and are way more expensive, that's quite impressive. Being lit from a window behind you is a suboptimal lighting setup, but here's the only real instance where the HDR is beneficial on the Kiyo Pro. It evens out the bright background with the shadowy subject. Really cool effect, and I like Razer's innovation here. However, as I mentioned in my previous Kiyo Pro comparison, the shortcomings of HDR are a loss of detail, artifacting when there's lots of movement or when the exposure and gain aren't in a precise range, and a blurry outline around objects. And of course, it drops the image down to 30 frames per second. So overall, I'd avoid the HDR if possible by putting your brightest light in front of you instead. And if your brightest light happens to be a window, then just film with the window facing you. At night with room lighting only, the Razer Kiyo Pro and AVerMedia PW513 again require their exposure and gain settings cranked up pretty high to get a usable image. Neither of them look good here, but with this little light, they both salvage the shot pretty well. Now the C920 is basically a brick at nighttime with room lighting. The shot is just way too dim to get any use out of it. I recommend buying a light to supplement any of these webcams. I've reviewed several on this channel, and the two main lights I currently use are the Elgato ring light and the newer 18-inch advanced ring light. Now this is what each device looks like with studio lighting. The AVerMedia PW513 is the sharpest of the three when set to 4K. Text and textures are very clear, but it's about even with the Kiyo Pro when it's set to 1080p. Honestly, I'm not really impressed by the 1080p sharpness of any of these devices, but the Kiyo Pro is probably the most disappointing as far as sharpness, just because the original Kiyo is actually sharper at 1080p than all three of these devices. I don't even know how that's possible. The C920 is the softest device, but not by a ton. The Kiyo Pro has the least noise in the image, which is most noticeable the less light there is. In regards to dynamic range, how well each device can display both light and dark areas of a shot, the Kiyo Pro and PW513 are about even when lit from the front. The C920 starts to struggle with banding and graininess from the light hitting the back wall, but not nearly as bad as the Logitech Stream CAM or the original Razer Kiyo, which I demonstrated in my last comparison. All three of these webcams have shortcomings in regards to colors, but in order, I'd say the Kiyo Pro is the best overall. The C920 is second, and the AVerMedia PW513 is last. The Kiyo Pro has pretty good colors overall, but there's too much orange added to the shot, which really shows up whenever something bright red is in frame. I showed a few examples on the screen, but one that probably everybody can relate to is a red solo cup. And yeah, it's not an orange solo cup like the Razer Kiyo Pro is trying to tell you. Still, of all the webcams I've used, this one does the best job with my skin tone. The C920 is hard to get bright enough overall. You need a lot of light, but even when you do, some of the colors just are straight up missing, namely certain shades of red and brown and some yellows. They're just not there. Still, the C920 gets my neon Nintendo Switch closest to what it actually looks like, and the colors it gets wrong aren't as far off as the color reproduction flaws of the Kiyo Pro or PW513. So I do have this one in the middle. The PW513's weakness is linked to its hue setting. By default, the entire image just has way too much extra green. And it shows up in skins, it shows up in the back wall, it shows up like everywhere. It's just like really like obnoxious green. But when you drop the hue down, the pinks and the reds get too bright. Colors have been the biggest weakness of the AVerMedia Live Streamer CAM 513 since its launch, and it's the main reason I recommended the Logitech Brio over it both times that I compared them. The Kiyo Pro on paper has the widest field of view possible, but the warped GoPro effect at 90 and 103 degrees is super distracting, so I just leave it at 80. The AVerMedia Live Streamer CAM 513 is plenty wide at 94 degrees, but straight lines are still straight, so I give it the win there. The tightest shot is at 78 degrees, which is the Logitech C920. As for autofocus, I recommend keeping autofocus off whenever using a webcam, unless you're going to be bringing stuff close to the screen. The PW513 is fixed focus anyway, meaning it can't be changed. The Kiyo Pro pulses like crazy when you put it on autofocus, and it's really distracting. So the Logitech C920 ends up winning here if autofocus is something that's important to you. Now, which one of these should you buy? Well, there's two categories. If you're on a budget, then it's a no-brainer to get the Logitech C920. It's much cheaper than these other two devices, and it doesn't fall super far behind them in terms of overall quality. As long as you have enough light, it's still the best budget webcam on the market. If you have $200+ to spend on a webcam, you should be getting the best of the best. And if you get the AVerMedia PW513 or the Razer Kiyo Pro, I think that you're compromising on colors or sharpness no matter which one you get. Personally, I would look into the Logitech Brio because it's really the best of both worlds. It's almost as sharp as the PW513 and the field of view is just under it at 90 degrees instead of 94 degrees, but it does destroy the PW513 in colors. Now the colors do not match the Razer Kiyo Pro when you have it at 4K because the Brio is stuck at MJPEG at 4K. But if you drop it down to 1080p, 30 frames per second, you have access to YUI2, just like the Kiyo Pro. And when you compare them, YUI2 on the Brio with YUI2 on the Kiyo Pro, I think the Brio does beat it out sometimes in regards to color. So yeah, on a budget, definitely get the C920. If you want the best of the best, then I would definitely look into the Logitech Brio, see if you can compare it with the Razer Kiyo Pro. I've done my own comparison, see what you like of those two. I wouldn't recommend the PW513 until they get the colors right. On paper, it does a lot of things really well, but the colors just don't work out for me. Links to all of these webcams are in the description, along with my other webcam comparisons, lighting reviews, and microphone reviews.